Welcome, welcome, welcome. Mark Bullock, of course, uh, who is the go-to Commanders analyst in these parts. He's got his own Substack here, as we know. And Mark and I are going to talk here on this Sunday morning. There's no game to discuss today, but we'll talk a little bit about the last game. We'll talk a little bit about what's to come. Not so much the Eagles per se, but everything else that's related to this. And hopefully, Mark and I maybe can figure out a schedule of some sort down the line here. Did you ever do one of these on your side?
I haven't done yet. No, I know we talked about doing it a few times. I talked about testing it, but I never got around to doing it. But maybe once we get to the off season.
Yeah, I put so many things to the off season because it's just the one man band thing it's a lot to process, and this year has been, obviously rough for everybody in terms of what to talk about. And I was like, all right, I'll put better focus on some of these things down the line. Steve Robinson is another across the ponder. He's talking to us from a cold Liverpool. You got thoughts on Liverpool, Mark?
I am a Man United fan, and so therefore, if he's a Liverpool fan, we are mortal enemies. Yeah. But I should probably leave my thoughts on Liverpool there. Otherwise, I will probably drive him off.
I'm not exactly a EPL go to at all. Once in a while, poke my head in, but I don't have a team or anything. I know forever Man U was viewed as like the Yankees, or the Celtics Lakers kind of deal. Is that? But I don't get a sense that it's still that. Maybe in like reverential terms, but not in terms of the actual results. I'm not to upset Steve if I'm right or wrong here, but is that accurate?
Yeah, basically, Man United had this manager called Sir Alex Ferguson, and while he was manager, they were the best team in England for the 20 or 30 years that he was manager. He retired in 2013, and they have just gone off a cliff and been terrible since then. Yeah, for the last 10 years or so. So basically, while I was growing up in my teenage years and my early 20s, was great. Man United were the best team, and they won everything. It was fantastic. I was super spoiled. Since then, in my adult life, they've been terrible. Yeah, it's not been great since then. I've been kind of getting the repercussions of that. But yeah, and now the worst part of it is that the last few years, Liverpool, who are rivals, they have become a very good team. Although this year they're struggling a little bit, but. Yeah, we won't get too much into the weeds on our football.
Well, no,
We'll
you're
focus
good.
on your football.
Well, I will ask you one last thing, and then we can move on. But this pivots a little bit towards where we're going to get to. And that is, it's always an interesting debate discussing with the team with the leagues here. Which coaches matter more, a head coach in the NFL or baseball or NBA or whatever? NFL, obviously, there's so many things moving at all times. It feels like that coach has the most impact, except he has two coordinators who I guess every sport probably has some kind of coordinators at this point. So I imagine it's more impactful than a EPL coach per se. But on the other hand, maybe not, because obviously strategy does factor in, and keeping guys motivated is always the biggest deal. Knowing where to place guys. So what from your perspective? What's the bigger impact, an NFL head coach or a English football coach?
I'd say because there's less players in the team, an English football coach has a bigger impact because they're managing the 11 players, and it's basically they're picking the tactics for the team. They're setting out the style they want to play with, the formation, the players that are going to play. Whereas in the NFL, like, you can have a head coach that does take care of that, but they have the coordinators that can also do that, and you get the CEO type guys where they kind of delegate the offense to the offensive coordinator and the defense to the defensive coordinator, and they're more working on game management and when to take timeouts, when to go for it on fourth down, that kind of thing. So I would say like they have to set a culture and everything. But there's a lot of head coaches that kind of take a back seat on the strategy of actual X and O's and stuff. Whereas a football manager in the UK has to kind of really be front and center on basically everything. So I'd say they're probably slightly more impactful.
All right, all right. Well, look at that. Always Mark, always with a controversial take. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well. Let me ask you about. Let's get back to your true expertise, the X's and O's of it all. We're not gonna discuss too much about the Dallas game per se, but the only thing that matters, as I've been saying this for a long time, especially since once Jaden Daniels started getting hurt, like with the elbow, and his season seemed to be in jeopardy, and of course now he's going to miss the last 4 games. That is, can some of the younger guys, the other people in the last 2 draft classes of Adam Peters, can any of them step up enough to make someone think that, hey, it's not just enough to say that this could be a starter next year because of the where they were picked in the draft, that we actually see something that suggests that they could be. And I don't know that Johnny Newton was ready to be there might be ready to be a starter next year based on what we'd seen until last week with 3 sacks, nine tackles. Obviously that's an incredible stat line. I know he got a couple half sacks and all that stuff, but an impressive stat line. So my question, I guess, to you is, and I know you wrote about him this week. I think you did, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the question is, I guess, where were you at with him before the game? Because I know Dan Quinn, whenever I've asked questions, they're generally positive about him, but I kept saying, well, why isn't he playing more? And, I get the
Yeah.
whole Deron Payne, Javon Kinlaw thing, but all right. So where were you at before this game, and how much, if any, did this game change your view of him going forward?
I think the game did change it a little bit in that we actually got to see him in a lot of pass rushing situations. Like this year, he's played kind of a steady 20 or 30 snaps a game, and it's been mostly as like competing as the third defensive tackle with Eddie Goldman, and Eddie Goldman has the upside of being able to play a nose tackle when they play their 3-man fronts, where when they have 3 defensive tackles on the field at the same time, he can play nose tackle, whereas um, Newton isn't that kind of guy. So Newton only really gets onto the field when they're just rotating both Kinlaw and Payne out at the same time, and then it's Goldman and Newton are in there, and that tends to be first and second down. When they get into a third down, they bring on that rush package, and it's either usually Kinlaw and Payne and 2 defensive ends, or sometimes it's they'll kick Jacob Martin inside, or earlier in the year it was Dorrance Armstrong, and then they would have just 1 defensive tackle, and that would be typically Kinlaw or Payne. And Newton never got a look in that. This week, Newton still didn't get a look in that rush package, which I just don't understand why, because that's kind of what he was drafted to do. But we did get to see him a little bit more in obvious pass rushing situations. Obviously, part of that was down to the injuries. Eddie Goldman's out, and Deron Payne was out, so he was kind of starting. But we got to see him more in pass rushing situations, and obviously, like that's not the only reason he picked up those sacks. Like he had some nice rushes on those sacks. He had some nice rushes on other plays. But you got to see the actual, the ability to rush against guys in obvious rushing situations where they know the quarterback's going to drop back to pass. It's not is this mostly a run down, or is this a play action down where we're having to kind of read and react? We know it's 3rd and 10. We can go pin our ears back and go rush, and you can see him set up a blocker and get not more than 1 attempt at it. It's on 2nd and long, I'm gonna try rushing up the field, and on 3rd and long, and on the next play, I'll try an inside move sort of thing. So you get to see a little bit more of a rush plan and see how he can identify opportunities to work with teammates. If someone on the edge is stunted inside, can he loop around them? Can he use his teammate inside? Like one of his sacks was a play action pass, and Javon Kinlaw had cut inside, and he used Kinlaw's cut inside to help him disengage from the center and go make the sack. So what we saw was some real good awareness of not just how he was rushing against his blocker, but of the other guys around him, and how that all fit into a picture of rushing the passer. And that was encouraging to see. So I think just in terms of actually getting to see him in those situations, which we just haven't seen this year, suggests that there is untapped potential there as a pass rusher. And obviously that's what he was drafted to be. He is an undersized guy. He wasn't drafted to be a big run stuffing nose tackle. He was drafted to be this quick get off explosive pass rusher from the inside, and he's just not been put in those positions to do that. Which comes down to like you start questioning: is that because he's not been good enough, or is that because the coaching staff has questions about him? Is that just because they truly rate Kinlaw and Payne better than him? And Kinlaw and Payne have had strong seasons. I would suggest Newton probably offers more as a pass rusher than Payne does at this point in his career, but Kinlaw certainly would be above him. So
The fact that Newton had more sacks in this game than Payne and Kinlaw have combined this season. Again,
yeah,
I'm not expecting Johnny Newton to get multiple sack games on the regular, but that's the fact that he did it one time, and more than him says something about something.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, for me, the frustration is that it's so late in the season now. You'd like to see him get a run of 3 or 4 or 5 games where it's like, let's get him in these situations. Let's see what he can do. Let's see if he can stack these performances back to back. Whereas now it's, he's had a decent game against the Cowboys, and now he's going to play a Week 18 Eagles team that is probably going to be resting players, and you're playing backup linemen, and how much are you really getting out of that sort of thing. So, yeah, it feels like it's a little too late for a lot of these young guys, but particularly Newton. So I don't know. You can read into this game and go, okay, he's our starting 3 technique defensive tackle next year. But I think you can read into it and say, okay, we're seeing that when we put him in these situations, he is responding well, and we think he can definitely be a significant part of that interior rotation, and maybe we can adjust our plans a little bit to incorporate him a little bit more as a pure rusher and get him in those rush situations a little bit more next year. I think they'll still probably, depending on what they do want to do with Deron Payne and that contract, they'll probably still need a defensive tackle at some point.
Well,
But
I was gonna ask you just for argument's sake. Obviously, I'm not talking about anybody specific in free agency or the draft, unless you have thoughts. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that Newton and Kinlaw are back, right? So, and let's just say Payne's gone, which I still assume is the likely outcome as a cap casualty. Goldman and Sheldon Day are free agents, so we'll see what happens there. But if there's a third guy, let's just say 3 top guys to rotate in and out. If it is Kinlaw and Newton, do you look at it as, boy, they probably have to go out and sign a starter worthy guy? Because I don't know enough about Newton. Maybe Newton's like I don't say designated pass rusher, but more in that vein. Or is it no? Get somebody who is more of a complement to those both guys, and let's assume that Newton starts.
I'm kind of in an in between spot. I don't think I would necessarily. I wouldn't be going out and spending like 100 million on the top defensive tackle on the market, right?
Right.
But I wouldn't be cheaping out on it either. You want a guy that Johnny Newton still isn't the best. The way the thing he struggles with is double teams in the run game, and I think they can avoid that a little bit. They have this fascination with putting him as a one technique between the center and the guard, and they did it a little bit early in his career last year, where they put him head up over the center, where they had Payne and Allen either side of him, and Payne and Allen would demand the double teams, so it would leave Newton one on one with the center, where his quickness would be really good against the center, and that was a nice little thing that they did. But now they're playing just their normal 4 down fronts, and they put him between the center and the guard, and he's just getting double teamed and run out of the building basically on those double teams. When he's able to just work one on one against the guard, he actually stacks up guards pretty well in the run game. So I'd like to see him just used as a pure 3 technique defensive tackle, and I think he could hold up pretty well. But we just haven't seen enough of him to say, yeah, he's for sure a starter. Like, as I said, in terms of pass rushing situations, it's been this game and that's it that we've really seen him in a lot of pass rushing situations. So that's not a lot to go off of. I still think you'd probably want a capable, certainly as a starting run defender to put in there with Kinlaw and Newton, and you could, if you want to go to those 3 down fronts, you could play like an Eddie Goldman type nose tackle in the middle, and Payne, Kinlaw and Newton on either side of him, or you can just rotate those 3 in and out in a 4 down front. I think that's kind of where I'm at, where I think you still need one, but not like a super high priced guy.
And I think this is a good example for me, at least as I go into the offseason. Like I know, like when they drafted Johnny Newton originally, I don't think anybody was saying in that exact moment they needed to draft him because you still had Allen and Payne, but they went with best player available. And yes, they probably had a sense that they were going to move on from Allen. But with only 5 draft picks, we know they have cap space, but there's so many other needs that this may be an example of an area. And I think running back to me is kind of becoming the same where this just may have to be good enough. Like we can't solve all our problems, spend all the money. We have other much bigger holes. So, right, and to your point, which you're 100% right on about it. It's too bad Newton didn't get more games. This is I'm preaching this forever. I mean, sort of right after Jaden hurt the elbow the first time, certainly after the bye week, and then certainly after Jaden was kind of ruled out. Why you're not playing some of these kids more doesn't make any sense. I mean, Jordan Magee's only been playing a lot more because they lost all their defensive ends, so they went to more of a 4-3 look. As we know, like there's so many of these other aspects that just not happening. Again, we know that Ben Sinnott's only playing because Zach Ertz unfortunately got hurt, so it is a very frustrating aspect of
Yes.
this. No doubt about it. But I do want to sort of bounce off to this question here from AP. He's asking about assuming that whoever's going to call plays next year, whether it's Dan Quinn or somebody else, but they stay within the Dan Quinn system. Where does Mikey Sanders still? What's his best sense? And I think Mikey Sanders still, for me, is like if you told like he's the player. I feel like if you said to me, okay, we're not going to tell you if Dan Quinn is switching systems, but we will tell you where Mikey Sanders still plays next year. I think if he's outside, Dan Quinn has changed his plan because I just don't see that Sanders still is going to be consistently big enough to play press, even though he plays bigger than he is. I just don't see that he's going to be physical enough to do that. We do see him get pushed around a little bit at times, but simultaneously, he seems to be still more productive or better outside than he is in the slot. So I think it's a really fascinating. I mean, he's not. No disrespect to him, he's not good enough where you like let's dictate the entire defense to satisfy him. But I do feel like he is where he goes will tell us what their plan is. I know we're going to find that out probably after they make the coordinator change, but that's how so I guess to that point, I do agree with me that if they keep the same strategy, he's probably going back in the slot.
He- I kind of feel like for me, the book on Sandwich still is kind of out there now. I feel like he is an outside zone corner, or at least a match corner that you have to play outside. You have to play him off the line of scrimmage. You have to let him play with vision, where his ball skills can take over, where he can play top down on everything, so he's not worried about getting beat over the top, and he can just attack everything underneath, have the ball coming out quick. He very much fits in that profile of what Dan Quinn had in Dallas with a Trayvon Diggs or a Deron Bland kind of guy, guys that played man coverage, but they were playing off. They started sort of 8 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, and because you had Micah Parsons and like everyone else blitzing, the ball was coming out extremely quick on slants and hitches and quick outs and stuff, and those guys were just jumping them, and that suits Sanders still really well. You're right. I don't think he doesn't play. He's never played press really well. Like the biggest issue he had coming out of college, and is still an issue, is when he's up in press or when receivers get tight to him. He doesn't have a natural feel of like he seemed to just get a little bit panicked and is like, which way are they going? And he doesn't read the clues of what their body is telling them, the kind of hip position, their head position, those kind of things. He's not reading that well. Once they get tight to him, he's kind of just starting to guess. Okay, are they going vertical? Are they breaking out? Are they breaking in? And then he either guesses and gets this wrong and gives up separation, or he goes, well, I'm not going to guess. I'm just going to wait and react. And then he's too slow to get out to them. So he always seems to struggle with that. And obviously, as you say, like with his size, he's not going to go and jam guys physically and disrupt them at the line of scrimmage. And the thing with playing in the slot, the popular trend around the league right now is you get the Cooper Cup, the Puka Nacua kind of guys that are big slot receivers that are almost more tight ends, and it allows you to play basically your 12 personnel run scheme with 11 personnel. So you bring your big slot receiver in, you tighten him into the formation as effectively a second tight end. And if the slot corner comes in as a small guy like Samuel, you run the ball right at him, and you have a really good matchup. And if you bring a big safety in onto the field and you spread him out into the slot and you pass at him. So that's the kind of thing that is very popular in the NFL right now. And if you put Sam still in the slot, you're just exposing, that they're going to try to run the ball at you. And maybe you can make up for that with, a better run defense up front. But that has obviously not been a thing for them for a while. So I think you have to leave them outside. And to get the best out of him, you have to play him off on a vision. Maybe they feel like with another year of development, of another off season at it, with maybe a new voice teaching him things, they feel like he can get back in the slot. And players can obviously always improve, and he's still very raw to playing defense and all those kind of caveats. But where he's at right now, for me, I think the book is he needs to be outside playing off on a vision in sort of zone or match coverages.
All right, I have a radical thought here. You're welcome to ask if I'm sober or not. But here's my radical thought.
Are you going to
I
ask
was
to put
at
him at receiver?
Well, no, but I will say, like, in a year where they had no receivers, why did he not play receiver at least a little bit? He clearly was really good at Michigan. Like, I've heard people always say he's like really, like, when he's out there just messing around in practice, especially as a rookie, that he was looking really good. I didn't understand why you didn't try him in a world where you're going with Robbie Chosen and Chris Moore and all that, but don't get me started there. No, but I was going to ask you on a list of topics I sent you. One was about Quan Martin and kind of what his deal is. He only played like 30% or so of the snaps this week, easily his lowest, probably without injury, probably since he's been with the team, or since early in his rookie season. And, it's been notable that he's been getting the snaps have been going down. It looked to me like he was the one who was sort of responsible on that Turpin touchdown. Like, I don't know what he was doing in the middle of the field, but you can discuss that if you want in terms of what his responsibilities, I think, were. But I went back and looked at, like, say, like Dane Brugler, obviously, when I was at the Athletic, their draft guy, really good. And I went back and looked at his, Bible, the beast stands. And I looked at Quan Martin specifically, and it said in there that his thought was that Quan Martin ultimately is probably going to be better as sort of like a nickel defender, because he's going to be better around the line of scrimmage, or at least like tighter in than he would be, say, pulling back based on his coverage skills and his instincts and things like that. And obviously they've had him playing free safety for most of the time. Is there a world where you would say, you know what, why don't you move Quan Martin to nickel, understanding that, like, he may not be the starter there, but you have other options. And Sanderstill, with his anticipation, his ball skills, his willingness to hit, move him to free safety and put him back there, thus somewhat mitigating his lack of size and putting him away from the line of scrimmage. And then you could still do your press corner thing on the outside if you want. What do we think about that?
So there's a couple things in that. I'll start with Samuel at safety, because that's the question I've been getting a lot of lately. Is could he play safety? If you're going to play the typical Dan Quinn single high safety, the free safety plays in the deep middle the entire game and plays 20 yards off the ball and is not involved in the run fit, maybe he could do that. In the modern NFL, you're very rarely playing that kind of style. Most defenses start with two safeties deep, and if they rotate, one comes down or one plays deep, or they'll both play kind of a quarters look. If you do any sort of that type of thing, where you have two deep safeties, one of those or both of those safeties have to be involved in a run fit. And so it doesn't remove him from being responsible for getting involved in the run and playing the run. If he plays safety, the only real way of hiding him from playing in the run with his size is if you play him on the outside as a corner. And even then, teams will try the perimeter runs where they run the crack tosses and he has to crack the place, but you're still hidden a little bit more out there than you would be at safety. Unless, as I say, you're just playing the traditional like Seattle cover 3, where he's just playing Earl Thomas in the deep middle of the field, 20 yards off the line of scrimmage the entire game. But very few teams do that anymore. In fact, no team does that anymore. So I don't know about him at safety. Maybe they figure they'll just try him around at different spots and see what sticks, and maybe he does stick at safety. But certainly he's not a strong safety. Maybe he could stick at a free safety. In terms of Quan playing nickel, it's a possibility. That definitely was something that the versatility was something that they really liked when he first came out, and I personally viewed him more as a safety than a nickel because I didn't love the ability to match in coverage. I didn't think he was great in sort of man coverage. I thought he was better sort of in the deep middle where he had a little bit more range, a little bit more instincts. And I don't think the coverage stuff at free safety has been an issue. The issue has been tackling, right? He's read things pretty well and he's fit the run pretty well. Is that he's missed tackles constantly, and that has been the issue, and which is extremely odd because Dan Quinn spent 2 off seasons saying Quan Martin's a really good tackler and he's one of our best tacklers. And it's like, well, if he's one of your best tacklers, then there's no surprise you've been having so many tackle issues all the past 2 years. But yeah,
He
so
he just looks
so
like
good.
he just looks like I don't want to say in his head, and I don't want to step on your area here, but like it's just like going all the way back to the Green Bay game when they were clearly having issues with covering tight ends and yada yada yada. I don't know. It just looked like he's been off all year, and obviously to some degree they agree because his snaps are beginning, less and less over time, especially since Will Harris came back. So it's just sort of like, okay, well, what is going on here? He's got 1 year left on his deal. Are we looking at a guy who's all of a sudden like just not in the mix at all, or is it the where he's being used? And obviously, the defense as a whole has been a mess, and that's why they made a change with coordinator. And we'll see what they do again. Maybe a new coordinator has a completely different view as to how Quan would look, but yeah, again, I don't know if this is the right answer, but it feels like they don't seem to like either guy at the position they may have to play. Therefore, maybe there's some value in considering a switch, but we'll
You
see.
could consider it for sure. I don't think you're going to get much out of it personally,
Okay.
based on what their skill sets were coming out of college and where they kind of are. I always felt Quan was probably going to be better as a free safety, and we saw in his rookie year, it was Ron Rivera was like, oh well, he's going to be our new big nickel, or Buffalo nickel was the term back then, and
Oh,
like they put him in this.
you got to give me a warning if you're saying terms like Buffalo nickel or position flex. I get the PTSD. But go ahead.
So like, and he didn't really do that well there, and like you talk about the covering tight ends thing, like that's what the things that he's really struggled with has been covering matching up man to man. Like when they brought in Will Harris was meant to be this former corner slash safety that could match up man to man and play man to man on tight ends. And then when he got injured, they trusted Quan to do a lot more of that because they didn't trust Jeremy Reeves or Percy Butler or whoever else to do it. So they trusted Quan on that, and Quan really struggled. And we saw the one that sticks out to me was the Falcons game where they tried everything they could against Kyle Pitts, and they put Quan Martin on him, and Quan Martin gave up like a 3rd and 17 catch to him or something like that, and just couldn't stick with him on a corner route. So I don't think he matches up very well man to man. And if you're going to put him in the nickel, that's going to expose him more to man, and not just against tight ends, which are in theory lesser receivers than a slot receiver, right? So, uh, yeah, I don't know. Maybe there is something there. Maybe you could find some sort of mix of a zone coverage defense where you can put him in the slot and that he's not going to be exposed to those man to man matchups, and then it kind of works out. Um, but I think he'd be better in the run fits than Sam still as a slot player, but I just don't think he's going to match up in man to man. I don't think either of them are going to match up man to man while playing nickel as things stand. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on it.
That's the thing. Like on the one hand, I think there's probably a lot of data that suggests that Dan Quinn should look to change his system. I mean, everybody's talked about how poor it's gone against Shanahan kind of teams, Shanahan offense teams, things like that. But the thing, of course, is when you make a change like that, that can completely alter the players you have with personnel. So on the one hand, they have a lot of openings because a lot of guys are hitting free agency and they're going to have this money. So they're not necessarily completely saddled by having a lot of guys maybe in a system that doesn't work as well for what they want to do next. But on the other hand, some of these guys, it will be potentially a question of how do you make these guys fit. Um, Let me go to the other side of the ball, if you're cool with that.
Yep.
I was going to ask you about um, what you think of the Bill, Chris Rodriguez, perhaps Jeremy McNichols combo or trifecta next year. Again, in the sense of, sure, you could maybe argue you need a little bit more, but when you look at all the other concerns, and now you see how Bill and Chris have run over these last few games, I think there's at least more encouragement that perhaps something could be there. But I wanted to start with this. Well, oh, by the way, our friend Steve, I have an update here for you. He's actually an Everton fan. He just lives in Liverpool.
Okay, that's totally fine with me. We're all good, Steve. We're all good,
Fantastic.
buddy.
Look at that. Look at that. I'm glad I'm bringing you guys together. Um, so but he's asking about Rashad White, who's been already become a popular name as a potential free agent. He and Jaden Daniels played college together. He's been a pretty productive running back at times. He's fallen off a little bit the last couple of years, and then Bucky Irving's there and all that stuff. But before we get to that part, like, what do you make of the if Cliff stays? What do you make of Bill and Chris Rodriguez back there? Because my concern is Chris Rodriguez, he has like 2 catches, like 3 targets all year. Like if you're going to have a guy like that and you're never going to throw him the ball, well, that's a pretty big clue for the defense. But when you're doing the hurry up, yeah, the goal is to keep the other team's personnel off the field or from making changes, but then you're locked in as well. So if he's out on the field, well, what is that? Are you kind of limiting yourself? And again, Bill, it's not like he's getting tons of catches. It sounds like he's doing a little bit better as a pass blocker, but I like them both individually, and maybe in a different setup, I'd like them as a tandem. But if they're both out there, I don't want to have to keep bringing Jeremy McNichols in because then that feels like I'm going with the lesser guy. So, but again, on the other hand, this may be good enough because they have all these other concerns. So, where are you at just generally with what they have now, and if that's sustainable, whether I guess Cliff is back or not?
Yeah, I think my opinion will be an unpopular one because I've seen a lot of people wanting another running back. I would be, given the amount of other needs that they have, I would be totally fine with them running it back with Chris Rodriguez, Bill, and Jeremy McNichols as their top three guys. For me, running back is a position that it should be like the. I don't devalue it completely in the way that a lot of people do, and it's like running back doesn't matter. I think running back matters, but I think it should be the last position that you look to fill on your roster. I think if you look at the best running backs in the league and the most effective running backs in the league, you think of guys like Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey, guys that when they were top 10 picks, but the teams that they were picked for were terrible for their rookie contracts, and then they eventually got traded to good teams, and they put those good teams over the top. And McCaffrey has carried the 49ers to really good playoff runs. Saquon carried the Eagles to a Super Bowl run last year. So
Look what yeah,
uh,
okay, look at the Eagles were one of those teams that just never spent on a running back, and then they finally kept building up the roster, building up the roster. Okay, let's go for the home run and go Saquon Barkley. And obviously, once they did that, it changed everything. But that was the last piece. To your point, they already
yeah,
had the line and the quarterback and the receivers. Then they add that, you're like, oh snap, this is going to be a problem.
yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at other top 10 running backs since then, like a guy like Bijan Robinson, like I think he's a really, really good running back. But the Falcons have done nothing with him since he's been drafted there. Like he's not. The rest of the offense wasn't built around it, and they have some decent components, and Kirk Cousins was meant to come in and be that thing, and Kirk is Kirk, and they went 8-8 or whatever it is now, and that it's not good enough. And I think Bijan Robinson will probably be the next one of the kind of McCaffrey Barkley guys that eventually has to leave Atlanta to go to a good team and put a good team over the top. And I think that's probably what will end up happening with him. So with regards to Washington, I feel like they've got so many other needs, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Allocate your resources to that. Sure, if you want to bring in a free agent running back that's going to cost you like $4 million a year, whatever, go for it. That's fine, but I wouldn't be allocating a ton of resources to it. I wouldn't necessarily be going out and targeting. Brees Hall is probably the top free agent running back. I probably wouldn't be going and paying him $10 million a year, because it's not going to be I want that 10 million a year spent on defense before I want to spend on running back. I think the way that they've built this offensive line now suggests that the offensive line, once they get some consistency in playing together, like Sam Cosmi obviously missed some time, and Chris Paul started the year as the backup and is now the starter, and now they've had a few injuries and what have you. But once they get those five consistently playing together, I think that offensive line can be a group that can be the foundation of a run game by themselves. Obviously, you have a really good blocking tight end, John Bates. I think Benson has developed really, really nicely as a blocker. You've got the foundation of a really strong blocking unit. You add in Jaden Daniels as your quarterback with the read option stuff. Suddenly, you've got the foundation of a really good running unit without the running back. And I think you put Chris Rodriguez in there, who's going to get you what is there. He'll be fine. You put in Bill in there, and he's developing. Like early in the year, he started to get a little bit too dancing around, trying to search for things and go off script too often, and I think that's why he got benched. And since he's come back, he's been a little bit more, sticking to the script unless the script is broken, and then go off of it. And that's seen his sort of performances raised the last few weeks as well. So I think you rotate those guys, and Jeremy McNichols never lets them down. Like, yeah, he might be a lesser player, but he does really well as the third down back. He's good for one of those random carries where it's 3rd and 15 and he somehow picks up 16 yards. Like, he's good for one of those a game. Like, I think he's a really valuable player for what he is. So I would be totally fine with those three backs returning next year. I certainly wouldn't be investing like a top 10 pick in a running back. I wouldn't be investing I wouldn't be going out and signing a Saquon Barkley this year. I think
So
that's
you're not
something
drafting
for.
Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame with a top 10 pick.
No, I'm not doing that at all. And that's not to say that I think you can't draft a running back in the first round and have success. As I mentioned, I think you just have to have the table set for a running back first and have them as kind of the last piece.
By the way, that's why I thought the Raiders taking Ashton Genty was insane. Like, he
Yep,
may be the next Emmitt Smith, but like, they have no offensive line. Their quarterback is, an older, like, they're a bad team. And, I thought they would be
exactly.
better this year with Pete Carroll and Tom Brady. Like, maybe would have a little bit of a Dan Quinn, Adam Peters type surge, but to get to like middle of the pack, not be at the top. So taking a running back is not. I completely agree with that. Rashad White. I mean, just since he was the name brought up. I mean, I guess look, he's been good in the past, but you know, he lost time to Bucky Irving, who's proved to be really good. And even when Bucky Irving was hurt, he wasn't exactly getting like a full boat of touches, probably a little bit more, but they had Sean Tucker getting some as well. So I don't have a problem bringing him in, but the question is over who? If we assume that Bill is the one who's definitively locked, I mean, Chris Rodriguez is a restricted free agent, McNichols is a free agent. I assume McNichols would probably, have a soft market and would come back. So the question would be, if you're bringing in White, can't realistically bring all the other three back because it doesn't make any sense from a how are you going to get all these guys enough work? And then of course the question is, who is like it's 3rd and long, your offensive line getting beat up, who's the guy you trust to protect Jaden? And I've not studied Rashad White enough to know. If you do, feel free to say, but like, I don't somebody has to be the pass blocker, and there's the safety valve component. He is a solid pass catcher, I believe, but yeah, I just don't know if you're having him, Bill, and Rodriguez. I don't know that works for anybody, but I don't know.
I haven't watched enough of him myself to really know what his profile is at this point. Like, I do think like they could carry 4 because they do carry 4. It would probably be Chris Rodriguez would be the one missing out in terms of he'd probably be relegated to that kind of backup workhorse back role that has kind of been his forte the past few years. And I think it maybe be a little bit harsh on him. I think he deserves a little bit of an extended run given how well he's played when he's got in there. So I wouldn't. Again, if you want to bring in Rashad White and be like, hey, Jaden, let's have one of your good friends in for you, then fine. It doesn't move the needle for me, but like I'm totally fine with that. I just wouldn't be allocating much resources to it. I feel like you're probably getting a similar amount of production if you keep Chris Rodriguez on a cheaper deal,
Right.
and stick with the guys that you have for this year, than going out and spending on a free agent.
And I'm not advocating for them to keep Deebo Samuel in part because I just think if you're going to spend money at receiver, I would prefer it to be another outside receiver. But maybe one way to say, hey, this is why you keep Deebo is exactly what we're talking about. He does gives you more dynamic ability out of the backfield at the times that they use him. And, it can be a guy that can break a little bit. We saw how physical he can be. We knew it already. We saw it in the last game where he trucked Dallas defender down the field. So maybe that's a reason a justification to keep him. And I think that if Terry McLaurin and Noah Brown had not gotten hurt as much, for miss as many games as they did, then Debo, I think, gets used more like they just did in this last game. But once those guys are hurt, they had to shift things around and take him away from where he was best suited, which is also the reason why I'd prefer to spend on a more traditional receiver than a guy that's a little more gadgety in there.
Agreed. I agree. Debo's an interesting one because I think you're 100% right. I think they didn't get to use him the way they wanted to use him this year. I do think there is a slightly unintended consequence of adding Debo this year in that because he is this gadget guy that you move around and you put him in different spots and you motion him all over the place and you line him up in the slot and you move him to the backfield and do all that kind of stuff. One of the things that was such a big weapon for them and such a huge philosophical thing for them last year was the tempo. And yeah, they're still going no huddle, but they're not snapping the ball with like 25 seconds left on the clock and really up tempoing guys and forcing those really basic coverages. And I think a lot of that is because they're trying to do this, Debo motions across and he lines up in one spot and sometimes he's in the backfield, slot, outside, and all over the place. I think the negative impact of that is they have been very little up tempo offense this year. And that was one of their I remember the whole talking point last year was Terry McLaurin lines up outside to the left the entire time and it's because Cliff wants to go up tempo and it's terrible. They should move McLaurin around a little bit more. And it's like, well, that is the whole point of the offense is that those outside guys stay in their spots and you go up tempo. So I agree. I think I would probably lean more towards allocating those resources to an outside receiver. If I was going to go with one former 49er receiver, whether it be Ayuk or Debo, I think I would lean more into the Ayuk thing from an on-field perspective. Yeah, there, I understand there is, a lot of baggage there with Ayuk, but I'd lean more into, he's probably going to be on a cheap prove it deal for 1 year. And if he is anywhere near what he was before the injury, that's an elite outside receiver. You put that outside opposite Terry McLaurin, suddenly you've got those two outside receivers that can stay on their sides and you can get back to the up tempo. If teams try to play a bunch of man coverage, you've then got two outside receivers that are going to win one-on-ones constantly. And then they have to bring safeties out to try to help double them. And suddenly you're running the ball really easily against light boxes again. So that, at least in theory, there is obviously other stuff to go with Brandon Ayuk, but at least in theory, that is more appealing to me with a Cliff Kingsbury offense, at least, than a re-signing Debo.
Yeah, I agree with that. If we ignore, if we put culture on the side and just say, and look, I don't know Brandon Ayuk, but based on what we've seen, I don't know. And then the fact that he's
Sure.
tight with the quarterback, and we already saw he's throwing out plays online from practice. There's a lot of questions for me with Brandon Ayuk, but we'll get to that another day. All right, last question for me for you. Somebody in here asked about the idea of re-signing Mariota, the importance of that, but also, it's going to, whatever money it will cost, you're not using it for something else. How do you kind of weigh that? But I want to combine that with something else. On my last episode, or one of my last episodes, the question was, if you can only keep Bobby Wagner or Von Miller, who would you keep? Obviously, Bobby Wagner plays every snap. It's still really good against the run. We've talked about the liability and coverage, though, and he's going to be 36 years old. There's lack of speed, all that. Von Miller is not a starter. He's only a part-time player. And I'm not saying his 8 sacks suggests that he's elite by any stretch. And I always think that sacks can be a bit overrated. Like, if you get 1 sack a game, that's cool. But if you're not really if the defense isn't really like, tilting the field, tilting their planes towards you, you're just getting a sack. It's not that big a deal. But that said, if you can only keep one of those two guys, who would you keep? But then I'm going to throw in Mariota. So if you can only keep one of the three, the backup quarterback, starting middle linebacker, or the edge rusher, who's probably going to cost, like, he's not going to, he will affect your plans about doing whatever else to do. Just good depth, and he did have a reasonable year. So which of the three, you can only keep one, who are you keeping?
The three makes it easy for me. I'm keeping Marcus Mariota over the other two all day long. I think if you take Mariota out of it, I think it becomes a much more interesting question.
All right, well, then take him
I
out. Let's
think
make it interesting.
okay, so I think I think there's two ways to look at it. If you just look purely at the best player currently, Bobby Wagner is a better player down to down than Von Miller is. So therefore, you'd want Bobby Wagner. Obviously, there is the cultural impact of a Bobby Wagner, the leadership impact of a Bobby Wagner. Not that Von Miller isn't this good leader, like he has his pass rush summit every year and is good in that regard. But Bobby Wagner is the heart and soul of the locker room and has a great relationship with Jaden Daniels and all of that. So there is an off-field element to Bobby as well as being the better player down to down at this point in their careers, at least. But if you keep Bobby Wagner, is Bobby Wagner going to be the guy that is like, you're not taking me off the field, and the coaches respect him too much to take him off the field?
Right.
At which point, I think you're losing out from having him on the field because, as you said, he's been exploited in coverage this year. And one of the biggest pet peeves I have of this coaching staff this season, we kind of talked about it earlier with like Ben Sinnott and Johnny Newton, is these younger guys are not getting opportunities to play, especially since they've been eliminated from the playoffs and they've had the kind of last maybe 4 or 5 games where they should have just been playing these young guys and giving them snaps and seeing what they could do in an extended playing time. And one of the guys that has a really high upside and could potentially fill a huge need for you is Jordan Magee. And Jordan Magee has flashed a lot of potential, and maybe they just see he's a will linebacker in the future, but you already currently have a will linebacker on your roster in Frankie Louvu. And so can Jordan Magee potentially be the long-term replacement for Bobby Wagner? I think there's a chance. Like, when you have a guy that's learned from Bobby Wagner for 2 years, then you think that there's an opportunity that he could take over that mic responsibility. And you do see when he's on the field, he's quite vocal with players. He's happy to kind of move guys around and make checks and change things. And I think it was the Lions game earlier this year where he identified that they were going to a choice route to Jahmyr Gibbs. And so he switched himself with Bobby Wagner pre-snap so that he put himself on the choice route with Gibbs, whereas instead of Wagner, and that's a matchup you would much prefer because Magee is a much better athlete. Now Magee then got beat on the choice route anyway, and they gave it the touchdown. But it was the mental part of it, the pre-snap, that makes you go, okay, maybe there is a guy that can play Mike long term. But until he puts the green dot on his helmet and he's actually getting the calls into him, and he's then the sole guy on the in charge of it, and Bobby Wagner's not on the field to correct him, you don't know that. And the fact that they have not taken Bobby Wagner off the field and given Jordan Magee that chance to see either way, like if he can't, then he can't, and that's fine. He's a will linebacker, and he's a really good young will linebacker. But at least give him the chance to go prove that he can be the Mike. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves of this coaching staff this year, is that they've not given him that opportunity. Because if he can, then that's the Bobby Wagner issue solved going forward. You've got your new Mike linebacker. You don't have to bring back Bobby. If you bring him back, you maybe bring him back as kind of almost a coach backup in the locker room. And that's great and that's fine. But yeah, that's one of the annoying things, is that they haven't given Magee that opportunity, and to a lesser extent, Ben Sinnott hasn't got the chance to catch passes, and Johnny Newton's not got the chance to brush the passer. Those are all pet peeves of mine.
I bet if you went back and took all the questions that I've asked Dan Quinn and the coordinators, obviously there hasn't been a defensive coordinator separately than Quinn the last few weeks, but if you did that over the course of time, and it's a question that I actually really knew what I was going to ask, as opposed to, oh crap, they're handing me the mic and I don't know what to ask anymore, and I just blurt something. certainly since the midpoint of the season, certainly since Jaden's elbow, blew out. Between Magee, between Sennett, between anybody at receiver, Johnny Newton, I always ask, okay, well, what about this guy? How do you know? Like I've asked Anquin, how do you know that Johnny Newton or Jordan Magee can do that unless he does it? And he's like, well, he does it in practice. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means something, but it doesn't mean it when the game is live and you have to make the
Yeah.
real calls. It's a completely different deal. But anyway, that's going to be an interesting topic for sure. So just pick this. Give me the name Wagner or Miller. If you could only pick the one, who would you keep?
Wagner, as long as he doesn't have to play every snap.
Right. I think I'm with you there. That would be the key there. You'd have to tell him up front, look, we may not be able to keep you on the field every play, and where does he land on that? Because I asked him the other day, what do you say to people who say that for these last couple games they should lean into the younger guys, knowing he might be one of those guys that would sit, and he was kind of like, you know, I might disagree with that, but that's not up to me. So we kind of get
Yeah.
that. All right, we need to go. Football's about to start. Tell everybody, of course, everybody follow Mark everywhere anyway, but tell everybody what's going on and what do you got coming up here with your Substack.
Yeah, so like this week I've been breaking down like Johnny Newton's performance as you mentioned earlier against the Cowboys, where we saw him get a little bit more opportunity as a pass rusher. On yesterday, Saturday, I had a post on Ben Sinnott playing, getting a little bit more opportunity to catch some passes. And still blocking really well in the run game. Next week, I'm going to be looking at probably more focusing on those kind of younger players in the youth movement and seeing how those guys are taking advantage of or not taking advantage of those opportunities. That's kind of the only real thing to focus on at this point in the year. That there's no point in focusing on scheme or like the older guys that are going to be free agents. It's going to be are any of these pieces going to be here long term? So can they contribute or they need to be added to the list of needs for this offseason? So that's kind of where my focus is now is looking at those younger kind of rookies and second year players, seeing how they're performing, seeing how they're developing, and trying to evaluate, are they pieces here for the long term?
Sounds like must see TV to me, or must read Substack to me. You guys know what I mean. Mark, you rock. Enjoy making fun of Liverpool as best you can, and we'll talk. Well, one game to get through, Mark. Just one more game, and then we can completely shift to the stuff that I think we've all been waiting to discuss because the last few weeks has been a little rough. You
Yeah,
guys
we
also
can we
rock.
can we can argue about the metric system being better than the imperial system.
See, well, I don't care what system it is. Just pick one. It's insane. Somebody
I agree, but have it
Somebody asked a
make
question on
sense.
Twitter earlier about if we basically started over again, what would be something you fix? And I jokingly said, well, half to I said the metric system. Yeah, I don't know what system's better. Pick one. We're all on the same page.
I agree, but the metric system is objectively better. It just makes more sense.
Sure, I don't care. Pick one. Whatever you got. You rock, Mark. Mark, I appreciate it. We'll talk later. So thank you guys for being here as well. And we'll do more of these. Maybe Mark and I can figure out a steadier schedule in the offseason because we're both going to be looking for things to discuss. So,
Sure.
and maybe next time we'll do this on Mark's system. We'll get him to, break the seal on the live chat. All right, you guys rock. I'll see you guys later. Thanks, Mark.